Today we're talking about how long THC stays in your system, and while I can't give you an exact number because there's a ton of variables that go into it, I can give you a rough baseline and all the information so you can have the best guess at how long THC is going to stay in your system, whether it be for an upcoming drug test, whether you're just curious, or for any other reason. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and get right on into it. The reason that THC stays in your system much longer than other substances is because it gets stored in your fat cells. People who smoke more often are going to have much more THC in their fat cells, and that is slowly released over time. So if you're someone who smokes really heavy, it might take you months, whereas someone who has just smoked one time, it might only be a few days. The next thing to think about is what type of test is being done. There are different tests. There's urine tests, there's hair tests. Obviously, the most common drug test we have in today's society is the urine test. That typically goes away pretty quickly for moderate to light users, but if you're someone who is a heavy or a chronic user, if you will, it can take up to over a month, maybe even 2 months. But with that being said, it is not the longest test. The most dreaded test out there is the hair test. If you're a heavy user, I feel like I've heard it can stay into your system up to like 100 days and maybe even more than that, which is insane. Seems like a pretty unfair way to test people. I don't really know of anyone who does hair tests, luckily, but I do remember hearing about it when I was in high school. Like, certain people had to get hair tests for whatever jobs they were going for. But luckily, don't really have to worry about that anymore. Things have gotten more lax, and I know a lot of companies, even like Amazon, don't even test for weed anymore, which is pretty cool. We do have a few other tests. So then there's a mouth swab. That one's really easy. I've heard of people who are pretty heavy users smoking like a week before and then getting a mouth swab and still passing. So I think those are pretty hard to detect. If you fail a mouth swab, I feel like you just didn't really put in much effort. But if you're a heavy user, you know everything is a little bit different. But if you have just a saliva swab, you should be good after a week of not smoking. And then we have a blood test, and what I've gained from doing research for this video is on par. It'll be in your system for up to 1 to 2 days for a blood test, sometimes up to a week, but not really much longer than that. So that is pretty much the 4 tests. Like I said, obviously urine is the most common test, and if you're a really heavy user, it can go up to over a month. So definitely want to plan ahead if you do have a urine test that you know about. And if you have a hair test, good luck. Do everything that you can. I'm praying for you. All right, so let's talk about some variables for how long it will stay in your system. Obviously, the first one is frequency of use, like I've mentioned already throughout this video. If you are someone who smokes a lot, it is going to stay in your system more than someone who has just smoked once or twice. I feel like that's pretty common sense, but also, like I said, that's not across the board with all substances. That is because it does get stored in your fat cells, but I think most people know that, so we're gonna go ahead and move on. And because it is stored in your fat cells, if you're someone who's a little bit heavier set, has a little bit more fat on your body, it is going to stay in your system longer than someone who is on the skinnier side. And if you're someone who consumes edibles, it stays in your system longer than someone who is just smoking flower. It takes longer for our bodies to break it down, therefore just stays in your system longer. So moving on from that, let's talk about some of the detox myths and facts. A lot of stuff that I heard in high school to do was crazy, and I've learned that over time. I thought there was a lot of truth to it, but once I got older, did a little bit of research, I found out that some of the things that I was getting told to do didn't really make a ton of sense. One of those was chugging cranberry juice or just chugging water in general. So what happens with that is you are going to dilute your urine. So when you take a test, you might get an error, or it might just say it's too diluted to give you a result, which is not really a good sign. It's not really a bad sign. It just means you are prolonging the test. Typically they'll have you come back and retake it, or they'll have you sit there and wait until you have less urine and it's less diluted, which is even more of a pain. And then typically you didn't really flush anything out of your system, you just diluted what was in your system. So therefore, when you take the test later on, you are still going to fail, most likely, if it's in your system. So don't sit there and chug a bunch of water before you have a test. It's not really going to benefit you. Same thing with cranberry juice. There hasn't been really any information to show that it clears your body of THC, although it is known, I'm pretty sure, as like a detox drink in general, just for other types of toxins in the body. But I don't think there has been any profound research that has shown that it has worked for THC. Like I've mentioned a million times throughout this video, it is stored in your fat cells, so just having a healthier lifestyle, exercising, eating foods that have less sugar, all of that stuff is going to help flush it out of your system a little bit quicker. But be careful, because exercise can cause the THC levels in your body to spike. I'll have to do more research on that in the future, but I do know that working out can cause those levels to increase, like if you were to work out before a drug test. So I wouldn't recommend working out like right before a drug test, but in general, burning more fat is going to give less room for the THC to be stored in your system, and that is the end goal here, especially if you're someone who has like recurring drug tests. I think I pretty much touched on all of the topics surrounding a drug test. We covered the variables that go into how long it may stay in your system. We covered the different types of tests that you may have, and we did cover some ways that you can set yourself up for success when you know you have a drug test in the future. But it is really hard to plan for a drug test unless you know a good time in advance. If you are in a line of work that you are regularly having random drug tests, I would say just, unfortunately, it's probably not the best to smoke, or you should probably just change jobs. It is a very hard thing, and there's no like foolproof way to do a quick detox, especially if you're someone who is a heavy smoker. But if you're someone who enjoys it from time to time, do it at your own risk. I'm not here to tell anyone not to enjoy the plant that I love so much and has given me the life that I live. So yeah, I don't know. It's a sticky situation. I do hope that the majority of jobs will stop drug testing. I know some jobs I want to continue drug testing. There's not jobs that I think everyone should be high for, but there needs to be a way to do it to tell if someone is high, like on the job. It's way different than someone smoking at home, off hours. I don't know, that should be very acceptable, just as someone having a glass of wine. But all right, if you guys have any questions, let me know down below. Hopefully this video was helpful. And if you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe and like button, because I'll be here with more informational videos in the future. I will see you next time. Have a good one.